Today you're on top of the game.
Right.
Tomorrow morning, if the election results say something else, you become extinct. You vanish and disappear of absolutely no significance. This is the only career like that. So when you have a career like that, you tend to do things to please people immediately.
Right.
We are the consumers, we are the people for whom this is being done. If we don't see the whole process, we will regret it in a serious way because every responsible scientist in the world is clearly saying by 2045, we will be producing 40% less food on the planet and our populations will be over 9 billion. It is not a world to live in, believe me. It is not a world to live in. 2045 is not too far away.
Right. Well, last time we spoke, we talked about the ecological issues and raising awareness around what's happening with soil degradation, and we touched on specific to two things that are of interest to both of us, which is specific to the African continent geographically, but also African people and folks in America. So I think maybe that's a good place to start to really make it palatable for people. How does it practically affect my life?
See, it's good that you mentioned that because when this food crisis begins to happen, which is estimated will start somewhere in 2030 and progress towards 2045 in a serious manner, the first place on the planet which will go through enormous suffering is Africa. Because Africa is in a situation where desertification has reached or soil degradation has seriously affected 45% of African continent. And it's estimated by 2050, 2/3 of Africa will be in the desertification process. In the last 50 years, the 30 wars that have been fought in Africa, which have been criminally cruel kind of wars, 27 of them were fought for control over agricultural lands. The Somalia famine that happened, the Sudan famine that happened recently, 260,000 people died. In that, 50% were children below 6 years of age, because children and the older people are the first ones to die. And when children die in front of you, you not being able to feed them, what people go through is indescribable, okay? So the pain of that lives with people and makes them more and more disabled. So, by the end of the century, African population is supposed to go up by 3 billion. It's right now 1.2 or 1.3 billion, it can go up to 3 billion. At the same time, food production in Africa, if business as usual happens, if no changes happen, food production in Africa will reduce itself to 30% of what it is right now. You can imagine that horror. So when that horror unfolds in that continent, in the past, many types of horrors have happened, man-made and other kinds of things have happened. When that happened, the first thing that happens is the world isolates itself from Africa. They are not on the news, nobody sees it. If 10 people die here, everybody sees in the world and everybody's horrified. There is a certain value to people seeing these things and saying this should not happen. But in Africa, when it happens, people die like animals and nobody sees it, the rest of the world barely sees it. There is a lack of infrastructure also and there is also a strategic aspect to it. Unfortunately, it is there. So, when this unfolds, the way it is moving right now, according to the prediction of every scientist, these are not astrologers, these are scientists making calculations. If it unfolds, the first and foremost people who will get the maximum pain is the black people in Africa. Next will be probably certain parts of Asia. So here also when it hits North America, maybe North America is far more organized compared to other continents. Sure. So because of that, this may come little later, but when it comes, the first population that will be affected is definitely African-American population. There's no doubt about it. When COVID happens, they are the worst hit. When anything happens, they are the worst hit, right, for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. I think that when folks are living in urban environments. It's one thing to touch and feel agriculture. I see it as part of my life, as part of my landscape, as how I raise my food and sustain my family. It's a little more obvious, the impact of agriculture. But when you live in urban environments that are entirely cement, there's a detachment from how does that impact me? That thing I see on screen, on television. Who cares? I get my food from the grocery store. I don't see there's a detachment there. So I think it's important for folks to…
Somebody was telling me, Sadhguru, but the Generation Z thinks the food comes from the superstore.
Yeah.
I said, when you say Generation Z, that is the worst thing, that means it's the last generation.
Yeah.
Please don't ever use the word Generation Z. And the moment you think it comes from superstore, that it doesn't come from soil, then that's the most serious mistake we're making. Educating our children is important, but more than educating our children, it is time as democratic nations, people stand up and say, this needs to happen. The reason why it is not happening is, democracies have their beauty and their problems.
Sure.
The problem of democracy is, there is a kind of a phenomena called short-termism. Because you elect a party or a person only for 4 years or 5 years at the most. And most of them come to power after they're 60, 65 years of age. Why would they take up something which takes 20 years or 25 years to produce results unless people really want it? I am very empathetic to the political leaders of any class, of any kind or ideology, whatever, because they're all fighting for their own survival, because the nature of political life is such, today you're on top of the game.
Right.
Tomorrow morning, if the election results say something else, you become extinct, you vanish and disappear, of absolutely no significance. This is the only career like that. So when you have a career like that, you tend to do things to please people immediately.
Right.
You definitely ascribe to short-termism. Long-term thing, if it needs to happen, people have to say, if you commit to long-term well-being of this nation and this world, we are with you.
Yeah.
This is why we want to move 3 to 3.5 billion people on the planet, so that political leaders will feel comfortable investing on long-term well-being.
And the electorate, the people can digest it and understand that we're invested in a long-term strategy. One of the things that's so difficult about the multi-pronged system of oppression that folks are experiencing, especially Black folks in America and otherwise, is there's so many moving targets and problems, right? Whether it's policing or housing or education, etc. So your energy, which you already have very little of because it's incredibly expensive and taxing to be poor, you're already low on resources, but you have to pay attention to play this game of whack-a-mole on all the things that are oppressing you. So then if something comes up that feels long-term, that feels like a luxury item. I'd love to care about that, but I've got to get my kids to school, I've got to avoid violence, I've got to find a way to put food on the table, I've got to do all this. How do I… So that's one of our
Now that
obstacles.
you mentioned food on the table as the last one, I want to make that the first one.
Yeah, and a connection between
Food on the table. If the food has to be on the table, the food has to come to the on the floor of the shop.
Yeah.
If it has to come on the floor of the shop, it has to be on the farm. If it has to be on the farm, there has to be rich soil. So that is the first priority. There are many issues, I'm not saying they're not important. There are many issues, they're all important. But the most important thing is fundamental life, isn't it?
It is. I think we have to maintain the connection to means of production, like an understanding of the means of production. I know when I see a video of violence against my people, I can see the source. That guy did that to that person. Our food, people don't have, we hide labor. Hyper-capitalistic societies, we hide how labor actually occurs.
Yes.
So you don't see what the people
It's a shiny product. Who made it shine?
Just give me the iPhone. I don't need to know all the children that worked for it, how the people that were exploited in Uganda, whatever, to get the result. So closing that gap by, showing what's behind the curtain, that's part of what
Yes.
I think this campaign is about. Like
Definitely we need to open the curtain, because this is not an audience. The food and us, the relationship is not that of a play and an audience. An audience need not see what's behind the curtain. They must see what is there on stage. That's all their business.
Right.
But here, we are the consumers, we are the people for whom this is being done. If we don't see the whole process, we will regret it in a serious way, because every responsible scientist in the world is clearly saying by 2045, we will be producing 40% less food on the planet and our populations will be over 9 billion. It is not a world to live in, believe me. It is not a world to live in. 2045 is not too far away.